Yeah, I'll start with introductions, introducing Yuan, but I think more, I would like to introduce the project because um, just like what I said, once I moved to Bangalore, there's this interest in what's happening in the neighboring states. And somewhere I think I should position this interest because those who are in the field of architectural heritage and especially, yeah, architectural heritage and conservation, somewhere one has felt that there is a certain regional bias and there is less known about certain parts and more known about certain parts. So the history of sort of working with Jewtown in Kochi goes back to the second studio I curated at Shishti. And since then, one has their eyes on Kochi. Also, Kochi Biennale sort of becomes a trigger point for me to think about how are you interacting with the city when and its heritage when you bring in such a diverse and mixed media form of art show to it every 2 years. With all these interests, always been looking out, and then Kochi Heritage Project has been a discovery through COVID. But I think last year, sometime I found out about you guys, and I've been very interested in the kind of walks again because they are not just the regular walks, which heritage walks, which I've known of from before. And then I connected with Johan, trying to meet him with my recent visit, which we couldn't, but at least that's how we have been in touch. So when again I had to think of curating this workshop, I thought it'd be nice to know one is what's happening in Chennai and how Tirupa and her team have been approaching it, and here is Johan who's approaching it in a place like Kochi and Kerala. So with that, thank you so much, Johan, for accepting this invitation, and really curious to know the process which has gone behind in setting this up.
Sure. Thank you, Ishita. Such an honor to be here with some distinguished people. I was also part of the previous session, and really interesting to hear about Tirupa and Nihar and their work, which is going on. Quite inspiring, actually. I've been following Tirupa and her page for a while, and there's a lot of stuff that she does, which I've not been able to do, and I feel like I've fallen short. But it's nice to connect in this platform and to learn more, and it's always about learning, and that's what my project is about. It's about learning, and I'm glad to present a small session in this series here. So just like Ishita said, I've been running this project for a while, and I think it's post COVID that a lot of people have got their eyeballs on me now. So before COVID, it was mostly a documenting thing that was going on social media. But post COVID, I've taken to certain levels where people can learn more than just reading it on social media or interacting online. So yeah, so just a minute. So I have an issue with my Mac. There's this thing which keeps popping up. So I just hope it doesn't come in the presentation. Just 1 minute. Yeah. So basically, I just want to talk about the project and how I basically went about starting it and what goes on in a typical day, and what's the future of it. And in the process you can probably learn, and I was going through some of the participants, and it was quite interesting to read uh, the kind of things that you were looking for. And I think this is probably something, there's something that you can learn from my project as well, because I started it from scratch. Um, so to give you a background of what I am, or from where I started. Uh, 1 sec. Can you see it as a presentation, or is it like the window?
So we are now able to see the full screen.
Oh,
And if you move the slide, I'll tell you if the slides are moving.
yeah.
Yes, we are on to the next slide. Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to basically talk about how I've been doing it, and what I've learned and I'm learning in this whole process. So my name is Johan, and I'm from Fort Cochin, from a small town that has been there, where there's been a lot of colonial influence in the last 500 odd years, but sometimes even more than that, that people generally overlook, which I found in my research, and then now I do share in my walks, which I do. So just to give you a perspective of Kochi, Kochi is down south. It's one of the southernmost states in India, and for a long time, Kochi was not visible in the historical maps or written records by a lot of people. And at one point of time, there was another port town very close to Cochin called Muziris, and Muziris was the more historical town, and this is where a lot of trade used to happen from the east and from the west. At one point, it became known as the Primum Emporium Indiae. So in India, it was the prime marketplace for the east and the west to meet and trade and make transactions. And for almost 2000 odd years, or maybe even more, that port city was quite well known. And even now, researchers and archaeologists are finding out bits and pieces of what went on in terms of coins that have been found. There have been Roman coins, there have been Egyptian coins with Sphinx on it. So a lot of findings been happening, and slowly Muziris is coming out into the picture about what really went on in that time. And from what it used to be, which was a prime marketplace in India, it became the queen of the Arabian Sea towards the latter part of the 20th century, when the British left. So this is basically the background of the place, what Kochi is. And like I said earlier, it was an obscure village in the banks of the Vembanad Lake, which is now very well known for its houseboat offerings that tourists generally take part in. And Muziris and what is now known as Kranganore or Kodungalur was the more important town compared to Cochin. Now, for a long time in the history of Kerala or in South India, there were the Rajas or the Zamorins of Calicut who were quite powerful, and most of the other small kingdoms that were located here. But with Muziris gone in 1341, which was a cataclysmic event that happened, and sort of a tectonic change happened in these parts, and that entire port town called Muziris was wiped away, which gave birth to this small natural harbor, which is called Kochi. And then from then on, you can see from the 15th century onwards, there's these Chinese traders who are visiting these parts, and suddenly they mention about this place called Kochi. Now, because of all those trade that happened in Muziris, a lot of those migrant communities moved from Muziris to Kochi, and slowly Kochi became the new port of interest for a lot of people, including the Chinese. And the rulers, which are not actually originally from here, they migrated down south and moved and established themselves in this small city. And they called themselves the Kochi royal family afterwards. So from then on, we see a totally new birth in the history of Kerala. Until then, there were prominent cities like Calicut, Muziris, and then Kollam, which were very famous. But then suddenly, from the 16th century onwards, it's Cochin that makes all the news. In your history books. So, coming back to the project which I'm part of, and this is something sort of a passion project which I started in 2018. To give you a background, I have absolutely no background in heritage or history, and from such a background, I've fallen myself into a stage where I'm actually um, fully involved in the Kochi Heritage Project as on a full-time basis, trying to develop it into an organization at the moment. And it all actually started when I was very young. My mom gave me an encyclopedia called Childcraft, and from a very young age, I started reading it. And history and geography was something which I really enjoyed reading in those encyclopedias. This is the time when there's no Google and internet and all of that. So I think I gathered up a lot of knowledge using those encyclopedia. And by the time I hit school, maybe seventh or eighth grade, I was topping in social studies, which is history, geography, civics, and I was probably weak, very weak in math and all of that. But growing up, I failed to see the importance of that. And like many other families in India, there is not much importance, given to certain careers which involves history and heritage and all of that. People just go for engineering and being a doctor. I also went a similar path, but I took commerce, and I continued my studies and then went off to work. I was also in the Middle East for second part of my life while growing up. So I grew up partly in Cochin and then partly in the Middle East, and so I continued my work in the Middle East, where for a long time I was not really a supporter or a fan of heritage or history or anything in India. I find a way, work somewhere else, and then move out or migrate, like many people are doing in India right now. They're all planning and trying to move away from India because of a lot of difficulties and all those things that they face while growing up, and to get good opportunities. So I was also the same mindset, but somehow in 2014 or 15. Um, I started traveling, and I traveled to India, but I went to the northeast of India and visited places like Assam and Meghalaya, and I was quite fascinated by the kind of culture that was, that was there in these parts. So it was totally different from what I had seen in the South growing up, or from what you see in your media, on your news, and all of that. The Northeast was quite untouched at that point of time, and so I traveled then, and it changed my perspective of India. So slowly, I started um, realizing that India had a lot of history and heritage, and all of that is, uh, India is just made up of a lot of things. So slowly I started doing more tours like these, and I eventually in 2016 I quit my job in the Middle East and I just came back to India, took a pay cut, saved up quite some money, and then I continued to travel for about a year and a half. And in this travel is when I start to meet certain individuals, say in Bombay and Delhi, who were quite passionate about heritage, and in the heritage space they were doing a lot of activities. So there was a friend of mine. Is in Bombay. He's part of a tour company called Kaki Tours, and they are into a lot of heritage tours in Bombay. And there's at least a dozen of their experiences going out in the city every weekend. And this friend of mine was a classmate, was a schoolmate of mine, and I could see the kind of transformation he had, being a person from Delhi originally, and then living in Bombay. He was actually speaking and sharing about Bombay, and so I went on a walk with him, on a private walk with him, and and the kind of stuff that he was doing while he was doing the walk was quite interesting. And I got the hook of it. I got the idea about what he's doing. So he basically sits at home, researches, gets some things on, and then afterwards he devises a plan to go out and then um, match up with whatever he read, and then he that's how he basically curates a walk. So when I returned back to Kochi, I was like, something like this needs to be there in Kochi as well, because there wasn't anything happening in Kochi at that point of time. So 2018, I returned back quite broke, and trying to look a space in the travel industry for work and to find a job there. I responded to an ad asking for storytellers. So I had no idea about what storytelling was. I've just been to these walks, and I didn't really know that was storytelling at one point of time. But then I responded to this ad looking, because it was in the travel space and something maybe I could start my career with in the travel industry. So it was a freelance position, and I get called upon whenever they have guests, and it was for a sustainable travel company who was into responsible travel. And that's how basically I started storytelling. And for a few months I was actually with them, interacting with guests, and it gave me a whole new exposure to meeting with people, and also talking about your own place. So I was the storyteller based in Fort Kochi, and while I was doing that, I had to basically document uh, these things that I was discovering. So in order to speak about your own city, you have to learn about it. So I slowly started taking buying these books, which are contemporary books, maybe written in the last 10 or 15 years, and started reading up on Fort Kochi, because that's where you start from. And from there, whatever I was gleaning, I was putting it out in a page called the Kochi Heritage Project in 2018. And I thought maybe whatever I'm finding online or whatever I'm finding in these books, people should know more about it, because not everyone has access to many of these. But a lot of people have access to Instagram these days, and the young people especially. So I made it a point to post these findings of Kochi's history, art, architecture, food, places, people, all of that. Whatever just comes and whatever feels interesting to me, I would just post it on that page. And a few months later, I wrote to this organization called Sahapedia, and Sahapedia was a great organization. As of now, they're not quite active, but pre-COVID, they were doing quite a lot of projects surrounding the heritage space, and they were in fact creating heritage awareness and its importance to the people of India. So there were a lot of cities on their map, and I didn't find Kochi in their map at one point of time. So I wrote to them, I sent an email, and I told them, see, I'm doing storytelling walks for people, and this would be a nice opportunity for me to be part of this organization as a storyteller or a walk leader. And from there I started doing public heritage work. So I put Kochi on the map for them, and I started these heritage walks which were free for the public. And it was a great learning experience for me, because I started interacting with locals. So my storytelling career started with a travel company where I used to get foreign guests, but now I started getting local people who are really interested in heritage, and that changed my perspective, because I came to know that many of the locals don't even know many of the streets or the houses or the buildings or the people or the history of the place. So um, I thought this could be a real opportunity for me to actually get in the heritage space and create awareness about heritage to its people. And it's only when we do this that, at some point down in the line, you would actually create an impact in the society. So prior to this, actually, I was actually writing, and I appeared the IAS exams, thinking about creating an impact in the society, maybe through social work and all of that. I would probably create an impact, but then that somehow didn't go through. I went through the first stage, and then the second stage was quite hard for me to proceed with the kind of studying that I was doing. But at the same time, I was itching to do something or create an impact in the society. And when this came, I was like, okay, the heritage project is something that I can do on a long term basis as a passion project and create an impact in the society. So the project started in that stage, from storytelling to public heritage works and documenting online. And uh, I'll talk about the research methodology that I did. So, for a person, for a layman who has no connection with history or heritage, and to go about, taking walks, where in the last session we were hearing about how accurate you can be, and things like that. So, it was a struggle for me at the beginning. So, but I made it a point that whatever I was reading, it was all thorough, and I was reading from sources that are foolproof, and that are generally acknowledged by a lot of historians, and uh, generally in the historical point of view. So I first started from contemporary sources, like this image that you see of Fort Cochin. It's a recent book which came out in the last 10 years, by a local person who I know by person, called Tanya. And she also, like me, she works in the art space as of now, and she's an art curator for the Biennale. But at the same time, she was quite fascinated by the history and the stories of this place, and she wrote this book down at one point of time. So I started with books like these from contemporary sources, but then on, we'll have to move from your books, and you'll have to have practical experience. So that's when I started reading these books, and then going out into the streets and meeting people who would maybe be of old age, because they would have a lot of knowledge. Like, if you look at the population now, it's probably the old age and the people who are above 70 who would have a lot of stories, because the generation in between were mostly working and spending their time building their careers, and they didn't really have the time to know about the history, or about the place, the heritage of the place. So I meet these old individuals who are retired, and sitting at home or sitting by below a tree, and start a conversation with them. And and then tell these stories that I read from these books to them. And so in that way you slowly start to hear different variations of the same story. So in a way you get like 4 or 5 people selling the same story, and there has to be some truth to the story. So I started getting information like these, and I started noting it down, either in my phone or in a book wherever I get time. And I started collecting these stories. And also, when I was doing these, when I was going out, I was also examining many of these heritage precincts. So right in Fort Kochi, I think all of it is heritage because the entire city was built by the Portuguese at one point of time, and so every other building has some historical story to it, or the other. And so I just walk around looking at buildings, looking at stones, looking at the streets, looking at signboards, looking at anything unusual that I can find, photograph it, come back home, research, search, do an image search, do a lot of things just to find out information about it. So I was collecting evidences like an archaeologist would do. And these are simple things that you could do on your phone. Just take a photo, come back home, and then read about it, find more information about it. But at the same time, I used to come back home with all this information. I used to, obviously, we'll put it on Google, and then you start searching. You get a lot of links that connect to it. You'll obviously go to the Wikipedia page. But one thing I've noticed is a lot of people read Wikipedia, but right at the end of Wikipedia, there would be some links that direct you to certain other sources of where that information is from, which a lot of people generally overlook. So I used to go to each and every link that is given right at the bottom of the Wikipedia page and get to the sources, and from the sources I would get to another source from where they actually wrote that from. And it's like a rabbit hole. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. And but the kind of information you get, it'll be so interesting that you will be getting small clues into the next source, and then the next source, and the next source. And it was very interesting to do this. At some time you just lose track of time, and then you'd have to come back to your senses and then leave all that behind and then continue with whatever you're doing. But that search actually was helpful because I had actually a research background in one of the companies that I used to work for, where I was a research analyst, and we used to do data mining. And this is the sort of data mining, and that experience helped me in getting information out from internet or from books or from sources online. Now, if you look at uh, sources that I use, starting from books, I also use the Internet Archive called archive.org. This has been one of my biggest sources of information, because you get access to a lot of free books, movies, software, whatever, um, um, online. And these are books maybe sitting in some library in the US or some library in some other part of the world, and someone would have uploaded it. But these would be books that you would never get your hands on unless that book is sitting in a library which is close to you. And so all of those PDFs are available online, books that are 100, 200, 300, 400, 500-year old, uploaded somewhere. And these books become a huge resource for anyone who's into research. So I started with these, and I think I have probably tons of GBs of PDFs, because I had a fear that if this archive is gone offline, then I needed access to it at some point of time. So I kept downloading these, and I still do these, maintaining a separate repository in my hard disk. Whenever I get my time to go through it, I go through it. And so this has been one of my biggest sources of information. And these are legit sources because these are books that were written maybe 300, 400 years ago. Now, talking about legit sources, you can differentiate with legit sources or not. Like, you can give a differentiation to it, um, in terms of the kind of perspective that that book was written. But that is up to you to actually figure out, because you need to make a perspective of how that book was written and what time or period that was written in, and also how things are now. So that is something that you get used to after reading a lot of books, and then you'll have to make a perspective of your own, and then present it to your audience. So that is some learning that you do over time. Uh, so I'll give you an example of something which I saw. So this is an image which I saw in a rare book I collected recently. So now apart from in the Internet Archive, there are some books which don't go in the Internet Archive, which is probably not hit the 100 years, free from copyright stage. So there are books that have been printed in India or printed in the UK and are not yet reached that level yet, not in the Internet Archive. So these books are quite rare to get. There would be 200 copies of it overall in all over the world. And I came across a book like this from these rare book vendors who actually sell these in different parts of India now. So you have these sellers in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai. They collect books from houses that are being demolished. When the whole family moves out of India, they probably sell all their assets, and books are one of the what gets sold out. And then these people collect it and then share it with people who are interested to buy these. So I'm a rare book collector, and I got this book about Cochin, but it was a picture book printed in the 1970s. But the entire book has pictures which are 100 years old. So you can imagine the kind of books, kind of images that were in it. And so I'll tell you an example of why I put this image here. Now, for a long time, I was walking across the Chinese nets, which is a big prominent landmark in Fort Cochin, and a lot of people come and see it and learn about the historical narrative and why it was made there. So this is an image from one of those parts where the Chinese nets are visible, and as you can see, there's a structure there with a ladder on it, and there are the Chinese nets in the background. There's a building, and there's a cow in it. There is a few people standing around it. So for a long time, when I was examining precincts and these heritage spaces, I found a structure next to the Chinese nets, very similar to what you're being seeing now. So I don't have a present picture of it. I actually, my bad. I should have taken a picture and put it there. But you can hear it from what I'm speaking now. So I used to see this structure there, and this metal structure on top of it. But the entire structure that you see in the image now, as of now, if you go there, you wouldn't really make out, because the entire structure has been enveloped with a banyan tree that is growing around it. So any person who would come to that area would actually see the base structure that you see now, but they wouldn't see the metal structure which is on top of it with the ladder and all of that. That entire thing is actually taken over by this banyan tree, which is grown over it. Now, what's really interesting is when I used to walk around in that area and talk to people in the area, they had no idea what the structure was. And all I could really get from them was the word pankawala. So Panka means fan and Vala means net in our local language in Malayalam. So this Panka basically comes from this structure. And the Vala is the net which is right next to it. The Chinese net which is next to it has a name called Panka Vala. And I used to figure out, I was trying to figure out what made them put this name Panka Vala, and no one had answers to it. It was just something that everyone heard about, and they just knew that it was the Pankavala, and they just continued using it without knowing the meaning of it. So at that point of time, I didn't get answers to it, and I left it that way. But when I got this book and I looked at this image, suddenly all that research, all that asking questions from locals, just came into my mind in a flash. And I had read about this structure at some point in some book, but I didn't really understand what it was, because I hadn't really gone deep into it and thought of it that way. But when I saw this image, suddenly what I read in that book, or whichever book I read it in, and whatever people told me about the space just came in. Because this structure that you see, it used to be a weather tower. It was a weather fan at the weathercock, which is on top, which is not really visible, but there's a thing that is spinning on top. Because of the fact that it was spinning, people called it panka, which is like a fan, and that name stuck on to that place, with the net that was associated right next to it, called the Pankavala. Many people don't know what it is or why it was called Pankavala, but now since I got the image itself, it became a huge revelation for me. So this is the kind of research that I've been doing all this while, and then suddenly you come across something, and then you can connect it, you connect the dots or fill in the blanks to, most of the research that you do. So many times you don't get answers, but many times at some point in your in your work life you would probably find an answer to it. So that was just an example, so that you can understand the kind of research I was doing, and how I get answers out of it. uh, Now, coming into the project as of
Yeah,
now.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we will
Yeah,
have 10 minutes more.
yeah, sure. It's almost done. So so as of now, the Kochi Heritage Project, from what I used to do was documenting online on my Instagram page, as you can see. I've moved into an initiative where I'm in doing storytelling tours and walks as of now, and events. So I relaunched it as a storytelling initiative after COVID because of the interest level. A lot of Indians started traveling now, and they really want to know about their roots and their own city. So the kind of turnout post COVID has been really great. And so I turned it into a storytelling initiative where I do these tours based on themes that I read across in the books that I've referenced. And so there's a walk called A Queen Story, which is based on a book that was written by an IAS officer who was really interested about the history of Cochin. And based on that book and from my research, I've made this walk out of it. And in a chronological way that the book goes through. Uh, there are other walks that I do have different themes. So based on these themes, I curate these walks and put it out to the public. Um, Through all of this, I'm basically creating heritage awareness either online or offline, and trying to get locals aware about their heritage. And it's only then that all of this heritage can be preserved, or it can make an impact in the society, maybe 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now. So the youngsters who are now going through Instagram, who would see this, read this, would somehow in the future maybe be influential in doing a lot of things about this heritage, or maybe their own heritage in their family. So the whole idea about the storytelling tours is creating heritage awareness and heritage education through social media, because that's the media that we can work with right now. The most powerful media that you can ever lay your hands on is social media. And I also take up heritage research work for individuals and organizations. So the Ashita had mentioned about the Kochi Biennale, which happens here. So I did a small work for the Biennale, which is curating the venues for the Biennale and collecting information about that space for their benefit. So I did that small piece of work for them before the Biennale started this year. And so I'm looking out to heritage, doing research work like this for individuals also. There's been a lot of um, uh, former residents of Cochin who actually write to me to find out details about their family, or probably a gravestone or something like that. So I go about taking all those work. And I also started with something, doing events around heritage this last December. So we had a series of walks that we did, which were really unique in the heritage space in Cochin, because there hadn't been anything of that sort before. For example, some of these walks that I do, are generally not history based in a whole, but I cover history along with its art, architecture, food, places, and its people. So this is an image that you see. It's a bunch of kids who actually came for a walk, and this is one of the walks that I do in a place called Matancheri, where they actually get to interact with people right on the streets, like how you do in Delhi and everything. So but this was a new kind of tour that was being done in Cochin, and it hasn't been done before, where you can actually go and meet some of these communities that live there, in a space where there's about 35 different communities that live. And so the kind of sensory experiences, these kind of experiences actually go a step beyond the guided tours. We are just talking about history and about that place, but when you actually interact with the place and talk to the people actually in that space, it makes a huge difference for people who are learning. So that is what I look forward now, creating sensory experiences for people. And at the same time, while you're doing all of this, you're actually creating an impact to the society. So those people who the participants are actually interacting with are actually getting to share about their lives and their history and all of that. And at the same time, some of these people who come for these walks buy stuff from these people, or help them in some sort of way. So that way, the community is actually getting benefited. And now these people are actually realizing the fact that what they are doing is actually important, and it is actually giving them an idea to preserve whatever they are known for. So that way, I see it as creating impact in the society, and it starts with the locals first, from them realizing the importance of heritage. um, this is how much time do we have left, Ishita? Hello.
About 2-3 minutes, if we can wrap it
Okay,
up,
okay.
right? Yeah.
Okay, so I just skip that part. This is an image. This is a couple of images of the walks that I did in December. These were totally different types of walks that I introduced. It's again storytelling, but in a different style. So if you look at the bigger image here, there are a bunch of kids pulling these ropes. So if you've been to Cochin, you would see the Chinese nets, and these Chinese nets are controlled by these ropes, which act like a kind of a balance. And so when these kids came in and I had to design and curate a walk for them, I had to do stuff which they hadn't done before, and for them to learn about that thing, they had to really get their hands on it. So it was a hands-on experience for them, along with the fisherman community which uses these nets, and they were explaining these kids how that net actually works. There were other experiences associated with that. So the image that you see on the right side, on the right top that you see, about a guy explaining something. So this was actually a typeface walk that we did with a calligraphy artist. So a lot of people generally overlook this, but typefaces, these signboards that were done before were all sign painted. They were done by the sign painters, and that work is actually, it falls under the category of calligraphy. And so calligraphy artists know that all of this actually makes importance, but laymen really don't know much about it. So that walk was about learning about these signboards and these typefaces that have gone, it's not there anymore because everything is digitized. And so that was a very unique walk that it. The third picture on the right side bottom that you see is was a tree walk that he did. These walks are probably available in a few other cities now, but tree walk was quite unique because a lot of people could connect to the space, and stories from the space came out while the walk was happening, and they could actually relate to their hometown and the trees that they grew up with while that walk was taking place. So it was an amazing experience where people could actually recollect many of their heritage or lost heritage that they themselves say, and it was kind of like bringing it back. So this walk was amazing. The tree walk, a lot of people learned about new trees and trees that are original and indigenous to the space. So these are the kind of walks that I introduced. So just to sum it up, as of now, the Kochi Heritage Project is now aiming to stimulate the curious visitor to learn and carry away with them a deeper and broader understanding of the city's heritage, and then to sufficiently enrich the mind to cause them to pause and look life from a new point of view and a new vision. So I adapted this from a historical figure in Kochi's heritage, and this is one of his lines that was there, and I thought it was very relevant for the kind of work that I was doing. And so now anyone who comes on a walk with me actually goes back with them with a deeper and broader understanding of this city's heritage, and they actually write back to me asking, telling me stuff that they found out on their new journey after the walk, and then it is actually now causing them to pause and look life from a new point of view and a new vision. Probably they'll go back and find out about their own heritage, and life goes on. So that's basically it, what the Kochi Heritage Project is about. You can follow my page on Instagram and on my website as well. So, Ishita, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Johan, for both
Thank you.
aspects. I think one, for increasing the tactility of the whole idea of engaging with heritage and history, especially when it comes to a city. So not just when you inherit family materials, but even city or a community history can be so tactile in your experiences. I think the second aspect is more important, is the fact that you need not be a historian or a certified conservator to be actually engaging with history, and how you find then your own creative frameworks to work with it.
Yes.
I'm also sure that this method must bring in its own challenges, and perhaps we can take that up in the questions to understand what kind of challenges have you faced, and conflicts in terms of things that come out. So
Yes.
we'll take it up in the questions. In the
Sure.
meanwhile, let's move to our next presenters, Christina and Rocco. I know them in many different ways. First, Christina was here with us in Bangalore as an exchange student back in 2019. Is that right? If I correctly remember. Okay.
18.
And 18. Okay. And we had fun time visiting Gulbarga, arguing about a lot of things, what we understand as culture, tradition, heritage. and she successfully still did a good project. But from there, we have been in touch because she feels the need for, as a product designer, to extend these conversations into the places that she belongs to and she inhabits. And that's where she has been collaborating with Rocco for a very fascinating project, which I don't think I'll do justice. So I'll let them explain. I'm skipping all the professional designations. They both got in touch with me again to discuss how they were going to approach community archiving and participation for their said project. And we tried exploring options and tools, across borders. And I think this is why they came into my mind, because I think somewhere these projects, whether it's happening in India right now for the participants, but even Nijum being in Bangladesh, or the kind of conversations that Rocco, Christina, and I have had across India and Italy as to what frameworks work across borders, what needs to be adapted in a different region, and how do we understand that by looking at each other's works. I have not caught up with them for a very long time, so a lot of it is going to be new, hopefully for me also. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation, and floor is all yours to take us through your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shita. So let's see if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen? I don't see you, huh? Please.
Yeah, you don't see us. Yes, your screen's coming up.
Okay. So I feel like talking by myself a bit. Okay, so thank you, Shita, for inviting us first. We are really happy to share our little project that's now it's almost 2 years old. First thing that I would like to say is that as you said, we asked your opinion when we were designing the process and the organization of this workshop, and our first intention was to face the topic of archiving, but what we realized, thanks to you, is that the word that we chose was actually wrong. We were our aim was actually to do a project of mapping. So the Remapping Lago has been a 2 days workshop during a Susteria festival, and was held in my hometown, that is the Lago. So our idea for today was to share with you which was our idea, the process, and then the workshop itself. Maybe we do a little introduction first. So I'm a designer. I've studied product design, meant as furniture design, and I've studied in Bangalore, and I currently live in Milan, where I work as UX UI. And I also co-organize this Susteria festival in my hometown in the south. Rocco, you want to say something about you?
Yes. Well, me, I'm Rocco. I have a similar background to Christina. I'm also a designer. Also studied in Politecnico di Milano with her, and then after that, I've been studied graphic design in London, where like the master was a bit more experimental, and we started looking into these topics of archival and how to apply design to archival matters. So that's why also it started the conversation between us for the occasion of this festival.
Okay, so I think that it's some introduction to the context, geographical and culture is a bit needed. So as I said, the workshop was part of the Susteria festival, and it was two days long. The workshop, the festival was a bit longer, and I co-organized this festival since now 3 years. The project was initiated by a group of people that actually don't live anymore in the village because of work or because of study, like me, but have a common and same aim to create some community moment in which we can discover or rediscover our local cultures from different point of view. So from music, gastronomy, craft, etc. To understand a bit more about the workshop and the festival itself, I wanted also to spend a couple of words about the place. So Lago is a small village in the inland of Calabria, a region in the south of Italy. That's historically a region with a lot of problems connected to the population and land abandonment. And it's actually one of the poorest regions in the whole Europe. The village, it's really small, and it has, I think, around 2,500 inhabitants, but it was not always like that. So now the population problem, it's big. It's a big one, and it started it got worse from the 50s of last century, and it's still going on. So this economical and demographical degrowth, obviously, it's connected to a lot of cultural issue, let's say a lot of consequences from a cultural point of view and social point of view. So currently the village, so there was a loss of knowledge and tradition and craft. And currently there are no a lot of craftsmen anymore. There are just few services, and there is also a strong lack of community moment. So it's kind of becoming really hard to live in the village. But we should also note that what is valuable is also the really strong attachment of its people and a rooted folklore. So, given this context, we pose ourselves some questions that were more connected to how we can revive the interest in new generation about the cultural heritage of the place, and also about the connection of this village with the outside world. So how we communicate ourselves, and how people of Lago communicate themselves. Last note about the village is that it doesn't exist an institutional archive. So here I collected some picture of how the village was, not actually is. And they comes from an amateur archive of this man called Antonio Scanga, that is really passionate about the village and all the tradition and craft, and he's also a great poet and singer that obviously uses local dialect in his song. I let Rocco tell something more.
Yes. So, as Christina said, so this was the context where we started from. I don't come from Lago. I don't come from the same region, from Calabria. So I was in all senses an outsider, and I had to learn those things directly from Christina. But for me, of course, like the way I was looking at at the town, at Lago, was different. My eye was different from the one of Cristina, and our aim was to make something that would happen within this festival, that was like a very short event, 2 3 days, where the idea was to bring the community together somehow, or like bring even like small groups of people together into some activities that would like reactivate the energies of the town. So for me, that I was a complete outsider, the first thing that I did when it came into looking for like informations about the town, I Googled it. And I went eventually to see on Google Street View, and I saw that the town was completely empty. Almost, it looks like an abandoned place. You go around, and there is literally nobody. It's all concrete. It's really ugly, and you 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 get the sense that knowing the tales, let's say, knowing the stories that Christina was sharing with me, I knew that there was like much more beneath this surface that was very it was a pitiless surface that in this case Google was giving to this place. um, so we started this conversation uh, about those like uh, huge monoliths of, for example, in this case, Google, and his eye that goes all over the place, shows everything to everyone, but at the same time, it doesn't really give justice to some voices, which are eventually like the voices that are leaving the place, people that are leaving Lago, that are staying there all year, and they eventually lived all their life in this town. So the idea that we got was that starting from this emptiness and this sadness, let's say, of a Google Street View, we wondered, okay, so how can we maybe take this and repopulate it again, like populate this virtual environment uh, through the eyes of locals, through the eyes of the participants of our workshop. Um, so to frame this project, we kind of like at the beginning we were wondering, okay, so shall we go for a more like research-led project? Where shall we put our focus? And after like many conversations that we had, and also the conversation that we had with Ishita, we realized that we probably shouldn't aim for something that was very much grounded into like history or into like pure archival matter or anthropological research, because we didn't have the resources to do that. And for the purpose of the workshop, maybe it wasn't the right choice. Like, because again, like we wanted to engage with the participants that would be in this Sustaria festival, that would probably be of different ages, that would be of different nationalities as well. Not all of them were coming from Lago. And so we started to pose ourselves questions.
Right.
So one question again was like, how can we design an experience that can cross participants, that span between different ages, genres, and provenience? How can we neutralize our impact as designers as much as possible in order to not impose our vision over the ones of our participants? And this question, for example, again, like came from various conversations surrounding the fact that, okay, we want to do a workshop to empower the people that will participate. At the same time, we kind of know what is the outcome. So where is the balance between designing but not over designing, like between giving them power and at the same time creating something that is communicable, that is shareable, and that we can show to everyone. And then also, how can we unlock the creativity of our participants, and how can we guide them to reach the outcome in a considerate way? And another important question was how do we pick our criteria? So how do we choose the locations, and who should, let's say, have the power in the room? So who decides what, who makes the choices? And I think all those questions were like fundamental when we did the workshop, because we had to keep them in mind before the workshop, so before the event happened, to prepare the materials, to prepare what could have happened. But then there was the actual workshop, which was another chapter where we would need to keep these questions in mind, because in every phase of the workshop you would need to react differently, keeping in mind what was your goal, but also what are your participants going through, and what they are looking at, and what they are interested in, and what's their approach to the project.
So yeah, as Rocco said, this question guided us to ideate the process, and what we had in mind was actually an idea of the final result, or how it could look like. But the rest of the process we knew would have been a bit not random, but really based on participants, on their background, on their perception of the place, on their ideation process. So we tried to conceptualize the process, and I think there is no better way than this to say that it was basically really free. To show you a bit how the workshop went, we divided it in different phases. We obviously started with an introduction to explain which was the aim of the workshop. We also gave some example to be as clear as possible. We did some ice-breaking activities, and then we started to pick the place with the group. So the places were chosen on a map of the village. The area was quite big, was basically all the city center. So both the historical part and the new part. And the plays were picked from only the only conversation of participants. Obviously, the people, the locals, were more influential because they knew the place that they could recognize on the map. After we picked the place and we split in groups, the participant went to explore. So I think this activity lasted a couple of hours, if not more. And the participants were free to go around, to start from the place we picked, but also to go on a new one. And it went like this. Me and Rocco, we also prepared a small toolkit to kind of guide or facilitate the collection of material. So the toolkit was what you see mostly. So some let's say kind of little books, and there was split mainly in two parts. One part was made of let's say creative exercise based, for example, on some action like drawing or taking picture, while the other part was a set of questions based on the theory of psychogeography. So the idea behind was to let people experience the place in a different way and be inspired by some really simple questions. After this exploration, the participant came back to us. We had a space with some material like paper, colors, post-it, and each group, also each person, started to share the material that they collected and why they picked that material, why they took that photo, or like if they collected some interesting stories from people, recorded something. And at this moment, I must say there was a bit of confusion between participants, because obviously it was really difficult for them to understand how to put together all this material. There was really a lot of things. So everything was more clear in the last phase, okay, where we actually had to create the final result, and also in short time. In this phase, me and Rocco were a bit more influential because the final output to create the final output, we need some software like Photoshop. So we tried to understand which was the narration that the participant want to give to that place, and help to create the final image. So we can have a look at the results. I don't know if Rocco, you want to add something about the process itself, or we can also do it having a look at the image.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. We can do that.
Okay, so I want to show you actually the final result on Google Maps. So I'll leave you for some second the QR code, so you can have access from your smartphone, and you can have the real experience. But also I'll try to share from the screen. So let's see if I have it. I should have it here. Yeah. Do you need more time to scan it? Yeah, I'll go for the experience. You can easily find it also after if you look for a lago on Google Maps. So this was one of the image. For example, here the participant, okay, the image were mostly created by many people together. In this one was made just from one of the participants, and she was studying comics, so she wanted to do some portrait of the people that she met. And also she added some sentence taken from a story of the childhood of these people. This is, for example, a little square in the village that during the day it's really populated, and these are the characters that usually populate the place. Then okay, I'll show some other images, and if you have also question. Oops, this is not. Let's see from here. Okay. This is also interesting, I think, because it's pretty characteristic from the village. So next to the village itself, there is an area that used to be a village in the past, like the more than 100 years ago, and then for natural disease, I would say, I don't know how to say in English, it was abandoned, but what is left, it's a mix of like self-made houses where people they have their animals, their pig, they have their garden, and yeah, this was one reconstruction from two people that actually were not from Lago. Then I want to show another image. This one, yes. This, for example, is a little bit different because it was made from two girls that are actually from the village. So what she wanted what they wanted to show was their memories. So they collected from their own archive some picture of their family in the same square that used to be like this, so with a big fountain in the middle and a lot of green areas. And now it was completely changed, and it's all concrete. So they kind of wanted to show disapproval for this change of the place. And here, for example, is a map, a kind of sentimental map of the place. Yeah. I think I can go back to the presentation. Okay, Rocco, back to you and what we took from this workshop.
No, yes. So these were some of the images that we produced, but I mean, as you saw, you can just check on Lago. If you look for Lago CS, you can also look for the rest. And yeah, so at the end of these 2 days, basically, what we've seen is that we absolutely haven't built an archive, but the good thing is that we have initiated a process that before wasn't there of, in a sense, collective inheritance, because we've like given back to the public these materials that now like they are widely available, and that represents this very specific, very intense framed experience that we had of these 2 days. And we also understood how it was important to empower the participants with this with a free-form process that would allow them to like to have creative freedom, basically, and have some guidance, but like not too much. But at the same time, we saw that the mix of local and outsider really helped. It helped us and helped the participants, especially when we formed the group at the groups at the beginning. So another choice that probably was, in my opinion, was a good pick was not to restrict the participants to certain, let's say, formations, like to say, okay, you all go alone, or like you all go in a certain way, but like to make them group based on some common ground that we framed at the beginning with them during the first brainstorming session, where we had this map all together, a round table. We all talked through the locations, and there were many locals that talked about places that for them were interesting inside and outside the city. And then after this conversation, after these sharing experiences, the groups basically formed themselves, and they just like, it was very natural to say, okay, so the 4 of you will go in exploration there, the 5 of you will go in exploration there. And the fact that it was mixed, local and not locals, also helped to give a variety of, I think, in the outcome, because you would see that some of them would be able to use archival images because they very simply they had it in their, maybe in their living room, and some of them took a lot of pictures because for them it was a place completely new, and they were looking it with a completely fresh eye, the eye of a stranger. Yeah, and in terms of what worked and what didn't work, the community responded. Let's say, like, I think there are two answers for this. The community responded very well in the very short period. So when we did this workshop, those 2-3 days of the festivals, there was a lot of enthusiasm about this. And the first day there were like around 10 people. The second day, new people came just to try this experience, and see what it was about. But then this didn't like after the festival was finished. It was an experience that was framed there. Nothing happened afterwards. Nobody tried to replicate the process, because also the process in itself, it wasn't the most straightforward. Like there were some technicalities that, even though we kind of guided the group and step by step, in order to make it as easy as possible, we also realized that it was not as easy for someone who maybe didn't have. You needed at least like a basic understanding of technology, some familiarity with those tools, some familiarity with an image editing software, which could not be Photoshop, for example. You could use like GIMP or other open source software, but still, it's not the most straightforward thing to do. So yeah, so in terms of continuity, maybe this is the only cons that it's something that it wasn't brought forward by anyone after we finished. I don't know, Christina, if you want to add something.
No, let's see if there are some question. If you also consider this might be helpful for your project. We hope so. No, I don't have anything to add for the moment. And we also had a link to the to a little website that we built. Unfortunately, it's in Italian, but I think you can translate easily. There is basically what we showed you today, and in the future there will be also another section about the second workshop that we held last year, and that has it is different. So it was our choice to don't continue with the same activity, but to find other topics, other media to explore in the second workshop. And but it's like the fil rouge is always to have a strong connection with local people, with local culture, and somehow introducing our point of view as a designer with our own experience, and also with design tools. So yeah, I think that's all. Yeah, I'll stop
Thank you
sharing.
so much. This was wonderful. I think also because it's been a bit of a time, and I think this whole reflection on what the process meant for the people of the town, I think that was very useful. And for the participants, I think just to tie it together for you, the idea was to have these two projects, which are place-based archiving or archival initiatives, to speak to each other, where we have Johan, who's working off the ground with the people that he knows of or books that are written about, whereas Lagos, where let's say there isn't much, and you're now trying to create a sort of, I think I really like the word that you have, that collective inheritance. I understand that maybe directly only Shwetal or Tonisha's project might seem like they are the ones which are more place based, but to be very honest, I'm also thinking out of the box here, that if the Sindhi literature library was actually curated with places mapped of the people whose collections you have got, or even Nijum, in your case, if you are imagining um, uh, uh, Lipitayaba's life through a place, does it change the way you curate the archive? So I'm just giving an ideas here for us to visualize this conversation more than just place-based initiatives. So while they start there, how could they become tools for you to build your projects? And in my mind, it was happening while I was listening to both these presentations. So thank you so much for taking us through the journey and looking at the outcomes that you have got. And definitely sounds like you should have more versions of this workshop at the festival. It will be very exciting to see from one year to the other how your community participants respond. And while I might have told you that the framework was not of that of archiving, I think it applies. I think we told this to Nihar also in the morning. Your project, what it will create is archives. So that's why, again, when Roko said it's collective inheritance, it's correct. You are creating now a set of archives for a community and for a place. So kudos to you for starting this. That's amazing. Okay, I am done helping respond or sort of put it together. Participants, any thoughts, any reactions, questions for Yuan or Christina or Rocco, or for each other, whichever.
Hi.
Yes, hi, Soni.
Yeah. So I was just about to formulate a response when, Ishita sort of nudged me with, the what ramifications for Sindhi project. I think a lot of these kinds of things. My work is primarily documenting this man's library, but I can see other kinds of connections coming up out of this. So, for example, if I can connect, which were the books that were published in Ulasnagar, which were the books that were actually published in, Sindh, which were republished here. So these kinds of other mappings and connections can come up really very well based on this. So speciality was supposed to be the next angle, but I'm right now drowning into too many factors to be able to understand that. But I think Ishita framed it really very very well. The other bit is I have a PhD scholar working with me whose subject is Kochi and literary texts about Kochi. So that actually calls for a one-on-one conversation. I would not take up that much time. But thank you to all of you and thank you, Ishita.
Right. So I'm glad Sonia responded to that because I was just ideating. But I think something that we will all work on tomorrow, which is more of a closed door internal session. The reason or the logic of flooding us with all these possibilities today was to also now be able to weigh out what could you do first and what could you do next. So you are right. If speciality in your project comes in next, in somebody else's it comes in first. So that's right. Makes sense. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Questions?
Like, I just had one question for Christine and Rocco. It was about when when you said that you started that workshop in the beginning. How was the response? How did people react to this thing? Because Christina, you are from that town, or you have a connection with that town. Rocco, you had nothing, and people have this sense of ownership about their place, and when you come from outside and you have an idea, how did people respond to it? I mean, what was your feeling at that time? Yes, I can see that it was very well received and it went off well, but initially when you approached people, what happened? If you can share some bit of that, or what was your process of reaching out to them?
Can I suggest that you also add where this question is coming from? It will really help.
Yeah, because so I'm working on a folk festival in my town, and what I have seen is that in the my initial research was of from 1950s to 2000, and now I'm building on that and also archiving that and building building an archive of the live culture and the changes that are happening right now. What I saw in the initial 1950s, 60s is that there were a lot of workshops done in those days to revive the festival. So it was a folk festival, but it was dying. The culture was dying at that time because of education and everything that came in. People in the urban, cities started feeling that this is something that villagers should do. It's not something that we connect to. And there was a revival of sort that was created over there. And there were, I think, there were people who did not agree to it at that time over there because they felt that this was going backwards. But in your case, of course, it's not like that, because you're not dealing with a culture which existed before. You're creating a new culture. But I'm thinking that now that this folk festival has reached, this folk festival is extremely popular in Gujarat, in Baroda, the city that I'm doing. But there is a need to put some new energy into it, because there are two factions in it. One is a very modernistic faction which believes that everything should change, and this should, there are, you know, all kinds of international influences that are coming into the festival. And then there is a very, very strong influence of, you know, everything should be as it was 200 years ago. And in between there is a space where I think something can be infused, brought in, and I think workshops can be done. Things have been going on in my mind about all that, about doing things where, you know, you can bring in people who are influencing the festival, and then put in a bit of heritage, a bit of things, and create some new energy over there. I saw a bit of it was a part of a certain small initiative last year, where, you know, people brought out old songs and decided to teach the younger generation, and the younger generation really took it up well. But I mean, I still feel that it'll be nice to know what you went through when you kind of reached out to people. Sorry, that went on really long.
No, I'll just say that I see also a lot of connection in general with the project that I'm carrying on, that is the Sustaria Festival. And the festival itself is a way to revive traditional local culture from the past, but also from the present. For how the people responded, I think Rocco wants to say something, because he from outside kind of expected something, and then something different happened. From my side, it was a bit expected, and because I knew the people, and I knew that it was difficult to connect with them and to do something new or something that they don't know. The place is it's isolated, not so much, but still the culture is like, okay, we see something new, okay, let's think a bit more about it. So this was the mindset applied to both the festival and the workshop that was one activity of the festival. For the connection with people, I leave the word to Rocco, because between us there were a lot of discussion about this.
Yeah, no, on the contrary, I wanted to leave the word to Christina, because Christina knows perfectly, I think, the answer to this question. But yeah, like I think so. The process at the beginning, yeah, it was kind of strange how to approach them, because for me, as she said, I was expecting, I don't know, something quite smooth, like linear, like saying, okay, we propose something, we propose a concept, an idea, we make a social media event where people get to know more or less, maybe they get interested, we will see roughly how many people will participate and what's going on. Well, the sooner, like the more it was approaching the date, the more like people were like dropping out, and they were like you were not really understanding what was going on. And even when the workshop happened, so at the beginning, at the very beginning, there was this bit of like kind of distance, and I think it really helped. I mean, that was really let's say, it was a really like a first approach thing, though, because like once we started having those conversations, and once we started showing them that in this workshop they would have the power, not us. They would have the freedom to do and to say what they wanted to say, and we would just allow them to do it. When this happened, then the trust was built, and they involved other people. So the first locals, like the first bunch of, I don't know, 5 to 10 participants, they spent the day exploring and talking and doing the workshop with us, and they spread the voice. And the second day, more people came, because there was some sort of thread that was already built. But before, no. but also this is still applies to a very, very small chunk of people. We are talking about 15 people over a town of, I don't know how many people were there, because also it was August, so it's like the season, the summer season, where it's the moment in the year where it's most populated. A lot of people, also young people, we have jokes with Christina about that. I say Lago is the place where people work most in the whole world. Like they're all working. When you say tomorrow there is a workshop, ah no, I'm working. I have this. That's, it's like a very productive town. But so yeah, so I think you're totally right. Like there definitely are these dynamics of building trust, and I think we partially made it, but with a very small chunk of people. And probably the continuity is the way, I think, in my opinion, just the continuity and like probably being present, being in the place and cultivating with continuity probably is the only way to build this trust, because otherwise, yes, you can't expect people, especially I think in small towns, to really be open to initiatives that they don't know, to people that they don't know as well.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your experience. So, because I'm from that town, but I don't live there, so my connect is not so deep, and I am an outsider over there now because I've stayed away for 30 years, so 25 years. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I'm going to extend this question because I think the trust building would have been important even for you, Johan, especially when you're working with so much of people's history and the ground. And this is what I also meant when I said that you must have faced, you have been challenged that this is what you're saying, but this is not true, or where did you decipher this from? So, how have you dealt with questions of trust and credibility with your project?
Yeah. So, in terms of trust, actually, it actually takes time for people to actually really trust you with what you're up to. And so, the first time you go meet someone, they're not really going to open up to you. The second time you're there, they're not really going to open up to you. It comes from habit. Like you keep going there, and then they see you, and then they have a level of trust. Oh, okay, this guy has been here. And at the same time, while you open up to them, you also open up about yourself. So one thing that has benefited me, or which was probably an advantage for me, was I'm actually from Fort Cochin. And so although many people don't know me, but like the locals really don't know me much, most of them know my family, or they know someone in my family. And so initially I don't really bring that up, but when eventually they don't really open up, I just add in my great grandfather's name, or someone in my family, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, you are so and so person's son or grandson or whatever, and then they'll slowly open up to you. So that is with people who really know about my family and everything. But otherwise, it's all been like meeting people, and then eventually they open up to you because they see you around. And I started taking walks even without but people opening up to me. So they kept seeing me bringing these foreigners, or bringing these other Indians into their small village or small area of where they live. And suddenly they're like, okay, there is a form of trust that they're building, and that way they now open up to questions that we ask. And they speak to the guests that come with me, they speak to friends that come with me. So that in terms of trust, it's a working thing that you keeps happening, and you'll have to work your way up into their minds, and then slowly you start to get answers from them. In terms of credibility, so um, most of the time I refer to history, or whatever I read on books, but at the same time, a lot of people don't give relevance to spoken or oral history. So uh, there is always a battle between the historians, and when it comes to legends and myths and stories like these. What I do is I take a balance of both and I present them to whoever is listening to me. I present both of them, and I tell the audience to really make uh, something out of it, because at the end of the day, it's how you perceive it. Some people like to hear legends, so like India is a land full of legends and stories and everything. Some people chose to believe that. Some people chose to just just ignore it. At the same time, there are people who only believe in written stuff, which is really proved and all of factual, so in terms of credibility, I don't really rely on anyone. I just give it up to the person who's actually listening, give them both points of view. So if you're saying about colonial history, I talk about the good effects and the bad effects of what that colonial has done into the space. So in terms of, say, for example, the Portuguese. So the Portuguese came here, they started the Inquisition in certain parts of India, but in Cochin they didn't have an Inquisition as such. But at the same time, Portuguese language and culture is deeply entered into Kerala's culture, and so the language that we speak in Malayalam has a ton of loan words which are actually Portuguese. And in terms of food, like we have some exquisite food you get in Goa, the same thing you get in Cochin as well, which is actually Portuguese, and that is actually developed. Um, a cuisine, actually, that cuisine is actually quite respected in different parts of the world. So that has developed our cuisine, which has made it better also, so in terms of good and bad, I feel both has to be presented to the audience, and that's what I do in my storytelling works. Give them the opportunity to hear both, and then they can choose according to their way of view or point of view. They can choose what they want to believe in.
Thank you, Yuan. And
Thank you.
I like the social difference that comes through, or rather the contextual difference of where you describe this whole idea of being known and the familiarity and the talking of the families. I'm very sure, Christina, people in Lagos would also know you and your family, but I don't know if that really plays out the same way as it plays out in India. And I remember these are the kind of conversations we were also having in Gulbarga, that the social network becomes a very important uh, tool in the way we can approach cultural projects, isn't it? And with that, yeah, Christina, were you adding something?
No, I don't want to add anything. I think we also we try to highlight also this the presentation that the mix of insider and outsider was really winning, because my presence was facilitating the contact with people, but also I have some stereotype about my culture myself, so it was needed an outside point of view. Yeah, and I think this was something that I always knew. Like, I don't want to do something from a place that I know so well, and for sure I'm having stereotypes and yeah, because I'm also part of that community. So to represent yourself is really hard work.
I hear
Because
you. Yeah.
the village is really small, so you really know each other. I think in a bigger context would be also a bit different.
I had the same thoughts about Gujarat. I have to be very honest. As much as I knew that a lot of heritage over here needs to be worked on and so forth, but at least in the early practice, I was also very conscious that I'm going to be very subjective and I have my stereotypes. And I think and that's the case where those early impressions which Rocco made of the sterility on the streets and this whole idea that it feels like sort of haunted or empty, and it misses that cultural imagery. It sort of becomes the intent of your project, which is so strong in the way then the outcomes respond to it, that now these artworks, if I call it so, of mapping the city has actually made it so much more culturally vibrant. What we saw on Google, but I know there are many more such panoramas. So that mix of objectivity and subjectivity becomes very critical, and this is something in this group we have gone over and over again with these projects. That how do we basically balance the two? So I think that's critical. I think very critical for cultural projects. More and more I hear about it. Nijum, Kostov, Srinidhi, anything that you guys want to add, especially from the perspective of your projects, if any of this clicks or doesn't? If it's okay, Kostov, I have been thinking about your project while these presentations were going on, and I was wondering if um, the idea of places and migration sort of does surface, and do you see a possibility for the digital or the experiential in terms of walks helping your project further? I'm also aware of the fact that maybe the May showcase is still going to be in person, but if we don't right now think about that in terms of the larger archiving project, do you see places play an important role? I mean, just have a question for you. If you have any thoughts, don't want to put you on spot, but
Yeah, I was also thinking that in some another way, like um, uh, how I can put my like materials, whatever I am like I have and I'm working with and I'm producing. So how it could be placed in a digital format, like I mean, how people could be like access these materials from anywhere. So whether it is in like in a in-person exhibition or exposition or any kind of discourse platform, it could be there like one more platform would be like in a like with more accessibility in terms of digital. So I'm planning for that also, like how it could be, and whatever materials I have, I'm already putting it in a digital like as a digital data. So yeah, like informations and datas and like image data and all. So yeah, it's also like helpful. Yeah.
thank you, Kaustubh. Yeah, I think this reminds me one thing that I wanted to highlight when I was listening to Christina and Rocco is that something that we all have not really touched upon, and maybe tomorrow morning I'll just skim through, is this possibility of thinking through digital visualization tools. And this is where DH Sony starts coming in. Uh, the fact that you would have so much of data and content, and the fact that you can use a variety of different tools to make meaning of your data. A very brief moment was touched upon on this subject even by Ram in the last session. And somewhere what Christine and Rocco's project is also doing with Google Maps is creating these avenues through the digital platforms to actually make sense of your data. Uh, Somewhere it really takes off the pressure or the heat of you having to do it when you're reading tons and tons of transcripts or a variety of mixed media archives. What kind of relationships can you make? And this is where your record sheets, which we have talked about in session 2 3, it becomes very important that the mapping and the breaking down of the information can be fed into certain kind of tools, and they can either recreate experiences. If you can't imagine walks, of course walks and tactility would be ideal, but if you can't do that, if those places don't exist or you are not in that place and you still want to build new meanings and senses, then you can start looking at digital tools. And one important clarification here is that you don't need to build digital archives to have to use digital tools. There are many projects which have chosen to not sort of project the whole archival database, very similar to the Lagos project. We don't know all that the art community members would have created, but the final output or the meaning sort of comes out. So this is one important step to keep in mind, and I'll try and just pull out some of the references that I would want you to see in terms of digital tools that you could use for communicating your projects also. Yeah. Srinidhi, anything that you want to add? So Srinidhi is also in Bangalore right now. He's also part of the other initiative where we are curating an exhibition on neighborhood histories. In fact, it's very um, ironical that he's not able to talk or attend completely because he's spatially occupied talking about the spatiality of his archives. Okay, in the meanwhile, I have one last question for the presenters, all three of you, and this is just repeating it from one session to the other. What kind of ethical and legal steps have you had to take with your projects in terms of ensuring that your community members or your yeah, in both cases your community members feel safe when you're putting out their information or when you're asking them to do oral histories or participate in a way? What kind of steps have you taken through the project?
Allora,
Yeah.
this is an excellent question, and I'm not sure if we will have a good enough answer for this. But well, for us, we didn't really uh, set like rules beforehand. We just mm, like the materials that were uploaded by the participants. We, for example, one thing that we stated was that if possible, we should keep like anonymous all sort of visual materials. Like, for example, some participants, maybe Christina, you remember, I don't remember the names, but like there were two kids that were wanted to tell a story about an episode that happened in a fountain that was like a bit outside from the city, and in this case, like they drew the episode, but it all remained like completely anonymous. Like they didn't draw like names or stuff, and this was something that we explicitly discussed with them. And same with the archival images. Those images were uploaded by the same owners of such, so there is no mm, like hopefully there is no issue with that, no issue with the representing something that it's not supposed to be there. But that's the extent of our yeah of of what we did in these 2 days. I don't know if that's enough. Probably is not.
It's not, because it's a really good question, but I think our approach was to don't face it really. The meaning that we didn't, like, since it was really short, like we didn't know what would have happened. We didn't think seriously to this issue. What we asked the participant when they wanted to put the faces of people or the picture that they took of people in the village was to go back to them and ask their approval. But without any, I don't know, paper or something. So I think that if we would like to go back to this project and make it bigger, for sure we need something more institutionalized. And another thing is that we publish the image on Google Maps. So there is also the risk that someone wants to ask to delete them, or not the risk, but the possibility. And but we uploaded everything with the account of the festival, so it's clear who published it. It's a real, I mean, something that you can trace. So if there would be complaints, like there is someone to respond. So yeah. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. So with me, I haven't really. Initially, I never thought about it in that way. But after you form a kind of trust with these people that you're interacting with, um, they also trust with whatever you're doing with it. So say if I'm recording someone um, giving me some oral history, they will actually usually they will mention that, don't record this. This is just my point of view, and you can probably share it, but just don't share it publicly or things like that. So they kind of tell me that. But also I ask them, is it okay for me to share this in my walk? So is it okay? Then they themselves give me a go ahead with it. So in terms of trust, that also takes place. Legally, I don't know. I haven't gone into that side of it, so I don't know really how much of an extent I can share many of these stuff. And on an ethical point of view, I actually go through it and then see if it really affects that kind of family. If it really affects them, I don't really share it in the public or in any of my walks. I'll just choose to ignore it and not share that, so that way it doesn't really affect it legally or otherwise. So it's always good to keep an ethical point of view, and also be responsible with the kind of information that is being shared, which is something that I have been working along with a lot of the companies that I worked with. They're all responsible, ethical travel companies which follow many of these. So I learned a lot from working with them. And so even if it comes to taking photographs, photography with many of these individuals, I only do it if they actually allow it. So it is not something that you generally go ahead and do it. So I've learned a lot from ethical tourism, and I follow that in the kind of walks that I do, because at the end of the day, sometimes it is also tourism. Even though it's all about research and getting all of that out, I work it. The whole thing runs through tourism, so I have to follow certain principles, which actually is globally considered. I mean, has to be followed according to the SDG goals that you have, which is set by the UN. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Yes, Shruti. You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that I asked too many questions. But Johan, I had this question for you, and if you don't mind answering this, you said you work with these tourism groups, right? Tourism companies. So, do you create content for them to share, or do you just help them do the tours? Like, is it like a financial collaboration, or is it just a collaboration which is on mutual grounds? Um that you, and why I'm asking you is, again, because we were considering, and I had spoken to Ishita about this, about doing these tours within the city. And when you come with as a tourist into a space, uh, I realized this when I was making the film, that my editor was in Bangalore. And when he saw the Garba sequence that was being shot, and the clothes that the women were wearing, his first reaction was, "Oh my God, I have to come to Gujarat." And I realized that he sees this very differently from the local people in Gujarat. So that lens that you have to bring in when you're bringing people from outside into your own city. So uh, I mean, when you're also doing it for tourist groups, then how, or at what level do you do it? Is it just a professional service, or is it something that goes beyond, that you have taken it on yourself?
When I work with these when I used to work with them,
Hmm.
it was a professional basis, and
Hmm.
I was being a storyteller for them. So
Oh.
um, the one thing good about the companies I worked with is they gave me the freedom to actually do what I wanted, and
Hmm.
that's how they curate their tours, because they want it to be natural and not scripted. Although there are scripts for certain
Hmm.
places, I never followed a script, and I
Hmm.
still don't follow a script when it comes to my tours. Each and every walk that I do is actually unique, because depending on the guests that come in, I take a small group. I've done bigger groups, but I take smaller groups, and I actually study the profile of the people who come in. Uh, with whatever limited information that I get, the kind of work they do or the kind of background they have, and then that tour is actually curated according to their interests. So that way they get what they wanted, and I get to give what exactly they need. Um, so so I don't really have any issues in terms of the tour as such. It's always been a professional one, and now since I do it for myself, like for the Kochi Heritage Project, I tie up with certain companies and I do tours with them, but I still keep my ethics and I keep the way of me doing it. So they've given me the kind of freedom to work with the kind of knowledge I have. And but it might be different for certain companies. So I that is the where all these ethical responsible tourism companies stand, because many of the tour companies that you work with or the travel agents, I have a big no to travel agents. I don't take up travel agents because they have the set tour and they have these people coming for this half an hour 1 hour sightseeing session, and I specifically tell my guests, see, my tours are 2.5 hours minimum. It can go 4 hours 5 hours depending on the kind of conversations you have, because it's a learning experience for both the sides. And I just keep it organic. So most of my walks end up 3 hours 4 hours, and I have a good time, they have a good time. Some of them don't even want to leave after the tour and I have to force them to leave. It's like, okay, I have to head out now. And that way I have fun when I'm doing it, and that's probably why I still do it, because I learn a lot from many people. So say the other day I had an Israeli couple, and it was quite interesting because the kind of perspectives they were sharing with me was totally unknown to me, and I hadn't really heard about that before when I was taking the walk. So it opened up my mind, and I was able to learn from their side while I was taking the walk for them. So I hope it answers this, if it answered.
Yes, sort of.
Yeah, feel free to just contact me whenever whenever when you have questions on my Instagram or WhatsApp. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We hope that we all make it to the Kochi Heritage Walks soon and experience this for ourselves. And Christina and Roko, we hope that another festival comes up and you're able to scale up this initiative and really add to this whole idea of collective inheritance for Lagos. Because I think hidden towns is also an important part of hidden stories and histories. So when by the time we all make it to Lagos, there'll be enough of an archive to actually look through your project. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and processes, and for all the participants for engaging.